June 10th, 1944. Just outside the small French town of Arrondissement, Normandy, the air smells of rain-soaked earth and diesel. In the hedgerows, frogs croak between the distant echoes of artillery, thunder that never stops. Under the twisted apple trees, a German Panzer crew lounges beside their Tiger I, its massive 88mm gun pointed lazily toward the west. Smoke curls from cigarettes, laughter bounces between the men. "Another Sherman today," says Oberfeldwebel Klaus Rhino, the commander, smirking. "I swear, they send them like sheep to the slaughter. Boom, one shot, and they light up like kindling." The loader, Fritz, chuckles, tapping his knuckles against the tank's armor. "This," he says proudly, "is a fortress. Theirs, a coffin with tracks." For weeks, German tankers had mocked the American M4 Sherman, calling it Tommy Cookers or Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter that always lights the first time. The nickname stuck because the Sherman's dry ammunition storage would ignite catastrophically when hit. Crews burned alive inside. Across the valley, hidden by morning mist and the thick Normandy bocage, American armor rumbled into position. The 2nd Armored Division, weary from Omaha and the push inland, was preparing for a new assault, one meant to break the stalemate of hedgerows and kill zones. Inside one of the Shermans, Staff Sergeant William "Billy" Coates, 24, leaned forward in the commander's hatch, binoculars pressed against his face. The smell of sweat and oil filled the cramped interior. "Jesus, look at those hedges," muttered his driver, Private Mike Sanderson, wiping grease from his hands. "Can't see 10 yards ahead. They're thicker than walls." "That's the idea," Coates replied, lowering his glasses. "The Krauts can sieve right behind him and with an 88, and we'd never see it coming." But these Shermans were different. They were new models, M4A3s, with wet stowage, meaning their ammunition was surrounded by water jackets, drastically reducing fire risk. And welded to their noses were strange, pronged metal teeth, the Rhino hedge cutters, designed by field engineers just weeks before. "Command says we're going to drive through the hedges now, not around them." The gunner, Corporal Eddie Marks, gave a nervous grin. "Through them? Hell, sir. That's suicide. Not if we move fast and hit harder." Coates glanced toward the horizon, where the German Tigers were hidden like ghosts. "They think we're still afraid of them." He patted the turret. "Let's change their minds." At 0900 hours, the rain began again, thin, misty, and cold. The sound of Shermans starting up rolled across the valley like thunder. Engines roared, treads churned mud, and the air filled with the mechanical growl of determination. On the other side, Reiner climbed into his Tiger, slipping on his headset. His gunner, Heinrich, spotted movement through binoculars. "Shermans, Herr Feldwebel. 3, no, 4, pushing through the hedgerows." "Fools." Reiner smiled thinly. "Ready the gun. Let's send them back to Detroit." Heinrich's finger rested on the trigger. The Tiger's 88mm barked, a thunderclap that shattered the quiet. Across the field, a Sherman erupted into flame. Black smoke spiraled up through the drizzle. The Germans cheered. But then, something unexpected. Another Sherman burst through the next hedgerow, not beside it, but straight through it. The Rhino blades tore through the thick brush like paper, opening a hole big enough for the entire platoon to follow. "Was zur Hölle," muttered Fritz. Before they could re-aim, white smoke filled the air. White-phosphorus shells, Willie Pete, screamed overhead and burst among the Tigers. The fields turned to a choking inferno. Inside his turret, Reiner coughed, eyes burning. "Reverse! Schnell! Reverse!" But through the haze, the Shermans kept coming, silhouettes of steel emerging from smoke and fire, guns blazing. The mockery was over. The hedgerows of Normandy were supposed to be Germany's natural fortress, each one an ancient earthwork topped with tangled roots and trees, made every field a separate battlefield. For the Panzers, it was a sniper's paradise. For the Americans, it had been hell until today. As Staff Sergeant Coates's Sherman crashed through the dense wall of thorns and dirt, the world exploded into chaos. The Rhino blades screeched against roots, sparks flying, branches whipping across the glacis. The tank burst into the next field like an iron beast tearing through the jungle. "Target front!" Marks shouted, eyes locked through the gun sight. "Tiger at 11 o'clock!" Coates slammed his fist on the turret ring. "HE loaded? Let's cook 'em!" The loader, Private Alvarez, rammed a 75mm high explosive shell into the breech. The gun roared. The round smashed into the hedgerow beside the Tiger, spraying dirt and shrapnel. The Tiger's commander, Reiner,
ducked back into his hatch, cursing. "Loader! Smoke!" Coates barked. Another shell chambered, another blast. White phosphorus erupted around the tiger, the smoke mixing with searing, fiery tendrils that clung to metal and skin alike. Inside the tiger, Fritz screamed as smoke poured through the periscope seals. His hands blistered trying to shut the vents. "It's burning through! Mein Gott!" Reiner's voice crackled over the intercom. "Engine off! Out! Out!" The back hatch burst open, black figures stumbling into the white haze. A burst from a .5 caliber tore through the smoke, Coates's bow gunner laying down fire, the heavy rounds ripping bark and bone alike. "Another tiger to the right!" Marks yelled. Through the choking haze, the second tiger tried to pivot its turret, its long barrel swinging like a giant spear, but the hedgerow behind it blocked the retreat. It was trapped. The Sherman gun barked again. HE, then heat, then white phosphorus. The tiger's pate blistered, then the fuel ignited. A plume of orange fire bloomed skyward. Reiner, crawling through the mud, looked back at the inferno, his tank melting into the earth. "They're using phosphorus," he coughed. "They're turning the air itself into fire." Across the valley, the rest of A Company Shermans pressed forward, bursting through hedges one after another. What had been a grid of death for weeks was now a maze of ambushes, but the Americans were writing new rules. "Move! Don't stop!" Coates yelled, slamming his palm on the intercom switch. "We keep rolling or we die!" Mud splashed, hedges fell, and the Shermans advanced yard by yard, using speed as their armor and smoke as their cover. By midday, the fields around Arrondissement were a vision of hell. Hedgerows burned down to glowing embers, tigers blackened and silent, their crews scattered or dead. The air reeked of phosphorus, cordite, and burnt rubber. Inside the last operational tiger, Reiner's gunner, Heinrich, was pale, sweating. "Sir, we're outnumbered. 10 to 1. Reiner didn't answer. He just stared through the periscope at the advancing line of Shermans, dozens of them now, cutting through fields like unstoppable phantoms. Their guns fired in rhythm, their tracks clawing through smoke and fire. For the first time he felt it. Not contempt, not confidence, but fear. The tiger's radio crackled. "Panzer Company, fall back! We are overrun!" Reiner swallowed hard. "Reverse! Cover the retreat!" But before the tiger could move, another white phosphorus shell struck the ground just ahead. The explosion threw fire across the hull, the world turning to white light and screaming metal. Reiner's last thought before the tank cooked off was how wrong he had been, how the coffin on tracks had become a burning angel of vengeance. At 1500 hours, Arrondissement was silent again. The Shermans parked among smoking wrecks, their crews emerging into the pale afternoon. Coates climbed onto his tank, staring across the blackened fields. Marks joined him, helmet in hand. "Guess the tigers aren't laughing anymore." Coates exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. "No," he said, voice low. "Now they know what it feels like to burn." He looked towards the distant hedgerows, still smoldering, the air shimmering with heat. "And this is just the beginning."
June 11, 1944. Dawn rose pale and thin over Arrondissement. The morning mist hung low, curling through blackened hedgerows and the twisted skeletons of tanks. A quiet, uneasy stillness had replaced the roar of battle. Everywhere, the land bore scars, burnt-out tigers, their turrets blown apart, tracks melted into the soil. The once green bocage was now a wasteland of ash and twisted metal. Staff Sergeant Coates stood beside his Sherman, coffee cup trembling slightly in his hand. The crew moved around in silence, cleaning barrels, checking tracks, patching armor with welded plates and hope. Private Sanderson broke the silence. "You think they'll hit back, Sarge?" Coates squinted up the horizon. "They will, but not today. Not here." He pointed to the field where the first tigers had burned. "They thought we'd keep fighting their way, head on, hedge to hedge. But we changed the game. That's what wins wars." Behind him, a group of engineers from the 29th Infantry Division examined the Rhino attachments, those crude, welded blades that had turned the tide. Lieutenant Collins, their designer, ran a hand along the scorched metal teeth. "Damn things worked better than we ever dreamed," he murmured. "Simple idea. Ugly as sin, but it gave us eyes where there were none." Nearby, medics moved quietly among the wrecks. A few German survivors were pulled from the ditches, men blackened by smoke, coughing from phosphorus burns. One of them was Oberfeldwebel Reiner. His face was wrapped in gauze, his uniform scorched beyond recognition. When Coates passed him, Reiner turned his head slightly, one bloodshot eye peering through the bandages. "Amerikaner, your tanks, they should not win," he rasped in broken English. Coates stopped. "They don't win," he said softly. "We do." He started to walk away, but Reiner whispered again, "They burn us alive, and yet you still come." Coates didn't answer. He didn't have to. The fields around them already had. By noon, the reports began filtering through command channels. The Battle of Arrondissement, though small by strategic measure, had become a symbol. American armor, once derided as fragile and obsolete, had broken a Panzer line through ingenuity and relentless pressure. Intelligence officers pieced together radio intercepts from the German 2nd Panzer Division. The words were bitter. "The Shermans now move through the hedgerows like ghosts. Their fire is everywhere. We cannot hold." For the men on the ground, it was more than a victory. It was proof. Proof that courage, adaptation, and a few welded blades could defy even the deadliest machine of war. That night, under a dim red sunset, Coates and his crew sat on the hull of their tank, passing a canteen and a pack of Lucky Strikes. Eddie Marks exhaled a long stream of smoke. "You know, when I first saw one of those tigers, I thought we'd never live to tell the tale." Coates smiled faintly. "We didn't beat the tiger today, Eddie. We beat the fear of it." He looked out across the valley, where white phosphorus was still smoldering in the damp soil, tiny ghostly flames licking through the grass. "Fear's the real armor," he said quietly. "Once it's gone, nothing can stop you." A gust of wind carried the smell of burnt fuel and wet leaves. The sounds of engines starting up once more rolled through the fields. The next push awaited Saint-Lô, then Avranches, and beyond that, the open plains of France. Coates climbed back into his Sherman, closing the hatch with a dull metallic thud. Somewhere in the dark, another tiger waited. But this time, the Americans would not hesitate, because the mockery was gone, the fear was gone, and the Shermans, the so-called coffins on tracks, had turned into dragons of steel and fire.